G'day and welcome to Partakers and to our series Investigating Jesus. Together we are exploring the life of the most amazing person who ever lived, who ever walked on this earth, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. We are investigating together who this man was and why he still matters some 2,000 years after he walked this earth. Today, we start investigating what the Bible has to say about Jesus. In the part of the Bible we call the New Testament, we have 4 accounts about his life. They are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are called Gospels. But what is a Gospel, and how are the 4 accounts different or similar to each other? And what were the main points each writer or compiler sought to communicate about Jesus? Firstly, they are called Gospels because they give substance to the gospel or good news about Jesus Christ as described by one of his early followers, the man we know as the Apostle Paul. We know that during his time on earth, Jesus wrote nothing formally. Yet after his ascension, the stories about him were preserved and passed on by his disciples, as well as by other Christian teachers and evangelists. For the first 30 years or so, these stories were possibly collated and stored together. That would explain the similarity in the 4 accounts of Jesus' life. They are not an exhaustive biographical detail of all that Jesus did. Similarly, the Gospels are also not diaries reflecting a daily account of Jesus' life. Rather, they are selective accounts of his life and were probably factual illustrations used by his disciples when preaching about him. Therefore, they would represent the theology of the disciples, as each story about Jesus is told. That is why they are trustworthy accounts, as well as rooting Jesus' life in 1st century Judaism and the Greco-Roman world. The first 3 of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are what are called the synoptic Gospels. This is based on their great similarity and possible use of a common source. Mark was probably the first Gospel written, as it is shorter in length than either the account written by Matthew or Luke. Mark writes as if Matthew and Luke used the Gospel written by Mark as a guide and elaborated where required. We see this in that Mark wrote none of the great discourses of Matthew, Mark 13 being the exception, such as the Sermon on the Mount. Nor does Mark show the great parables that Luke records for us. Surely if Mark had used either the accounts of Matthew or Luke, he would have used these 2 examples. Matthew is closer in similarity to Mark than it is to Luke. Luke does share large portions of Mark, and quite often verbatim, but with a greater use of the Greek language. However, the Gospel of John, on the other hand, while still telling about Jesus' ministry, has vastly different story content. Whereas in the synoptic Gospels, Jesus talks about the kingdom of God frequently, in the Gospel of John, Jesus talks about himself much more frequently. An example of this is in the 7 I am statements, which we will look at later. And for this reason, the Gospel of John was probably written much later than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Thanks for joining us here on Partakers. Come back again every day to www.partakers.co.uk, where there is something uploaded to help you as a Christian disciple wherever you are in the world to live for Jesus. See you later.